I don't care what the regulations say. These beds are for my men, and you will release them immediately.
Listen up. Every single person in this room has a role. Every role matters. But roles mean nothing if you don't respect the chain. Orders are not suggestions. They are lifelines, your lifeline, and the lifeline of everyone next to you. I don't care how long you've been here or how much you think you know. Disrespect the process, and you'll learn why the system exists the hard way. You will fail, not because you're incompetent, but because you ignored what was right in front of you. The weakest link doesn't just endanger themselves. They endanger every single person standing here. You think this is just discipline. No, this is survival. This is trust. Trust that your brother or sister in the field will act knowing you will do the same. So when you see someone struggling, don't laugh. Don't judge. Step in. Follow through. Because when the alarm sounds, the consequences of ignoring that responsibility won't wait for explanations. They hit immediately. Respect. Authority. Responsibility. Live by it. Or live knowing you could have and should have done better. The hum of the fluorescent lights flickered overhead, steady as the distant thrum of the generator outside. Lieutenant Harper leaned against the wall of the makeshift med bay, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the rows of bunks and folding cots. The smell of antiseptic mixed with sweat hung thick in the air, clinging to the fabric of uniforms and the walls themselves. "Private Reynolds," Harper called, voice sharp but controlled. "Move that cot closer to the monitor. I want vitals updated every 5 minutes." Reynolds, barely out of boot camp, hesitated for a fraction too long. His sleeves were rolled unevenly, and his boots scraped against the concrete floor as he stepped forward. The rookie's hands trembled slightly, more from nerves than the weight of the task. Harper noticed, but said nothing, letting the silence press. The subtle pause was punishment enough. In this environment, hesitation could cost lives. Sergeant Delgado snorted quietly from across the room. Lean, weathered, with a thin scar tracing the side of his jaw, he was the unofficial enforcer of the med bay. He had been there long enough to know which new recruits would break under pressure and which would adapt. His eyes followed Reynolds like a hawk. "You got this, kid?" Delgado asked, tone almost teasing, but the edge of menace in it made the air tighten. Reynolds swallowed and nodded, adjusting the cot with a clumsy efficiency. Every movement felt amplified under the scrutiny. The others, nurses, medics, and officers, watched with quiet intensity. This wasn't a classroom. This was a place where mistakes were catalogued silently and remembered loudly. Harper's gaze swept across the room again. Nurse Ellis, a petite woman with a no-nonsense expression and a streak of confidence that defied her size, adjusted the Ford drip on a patient with deft, precise movements. She didn't speak unnecessarily, but when she did, the words carried weight. Even Delgado, who rarely acknowledged authority outside of his own rank, gave her a respectful nod as she passed. Harper made a mental note. This one, underestimated by some, would hold her ground when it mattered most. Outside the bay, the wind whipped across the tarmac, rattling metal and sending a cold bite through the walls. Somewhere down the hall, the monitors beeping, steady, methodical, punctuated the quiet. Each beep was a heartbeat, a reminder that here, in this metal and concrete box of urgency and fatigue, every second mattered. Harper's eyes flicked back to Reynolds, who now had the cot in place, but was fumbling with the monitor's connections. "Steady," Harper said, moving closer. "Slow is better than wrong. You'll learn that soon enough." "Why, yes, sir," Reynolds replied, voice tight. He tried to square his shoulders, but his posture betrayed the tension curling through him. Every command, every glance, reinforced the invisible lines of authority running through the room. Delgado leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You remind me of someone," he muttered under his breath. "Used to be a lot like you, thought knowing the manual was enough." His eyes softened slightly at the memory, though the words carried a warning. Manuals didn't save lives, presence of mind did. Discipline did. Respect for the hierarchy, even when you didn't like it, did. Ellis moved past Reynolds again, this time stopping to correct his hand placement on the tubing. "You're gripping too hard. Relax." The patient feels that tension, she said softly, almost more to herself than to him. The words landed heavier than any shout. They carried authority in calmness. Reynolds blinked, absorbing it, trying to match her efficiency without panicking. Harper noted the subtle interactions, the quiet corrections, the measured steps, the way every veteran moved with a rhythm shaped by years of expectation and consequence. Here, authority wasn't screamed, it was enacted. Every order, every glance, every shift of weight communicated power. The rookies learned quickly, or they didn't last. A distant alarm echoed through the corridors, clipped and urgent. Everyone stiffened, muscles tensing in response to instinct honed over months of relentless drills. Harper and Delgado exchanged a glance, silent communication spanning years of service. Reynolds froze, eyes wide, and Harper's voice cut through the room. Move. Now. Focus on the task at hand. Ellis adjusted another four-line, hands steady despite the sudden tension. Reynolds followed, guided by instruction, observation, and sheer adrenaline. The med bay became a study in hierarchy, veterans guiding, rookies learning, the environment shaping behavior in every motion. In these small, deliberate movements, the story of each person was already written. Harper could see the rookies' potential, the sergeant's ingrained authority, Ellis's unspoken command. Each had a place. Each had weight. And in this world, where seconds counted and lives hung on discipline and attentiveness, the hierarchy wasn't just respected. It was survival. The monitor beeped again, louder this time, a subtle harbinger that something was coming, something that would test every line of authority, every judgment, every underestimated hand. And in that tension, Reynolds realized he wasn't just moving cots or checking vitals anymore. He was part of a system that demanded obedience, awareness, and courage, whether he felt ready or not. The mess hall was crowded, the low hum of chatter punctuated by clanging trays and the occasional sharp bark of an officer. Reynolds carried his tray carefully, scanning for an empty spot. Every glance landed on someone higher-ranking, someone who could make or break his day with a word. Private Reynolds, a voice cut through the din. It was Sergeant Delgado, leaning casually against the wall, arms crossed. The corners of his mouth twitched into a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "You're in my line. Move." Reynolds hesitated, trying to maneuver around a table full of seated soldiers. A slip of the tray, a slight misstep. He felt the weight of every gaze. The murmurs rippled through the room, not cruel but observant, the way seasoned soldiers notice mistakes. "You heard me," Delgado snapped, louder this time. The tray clanged against the edge of the table, drawing more eyes. Reynolds's face flushed. He moved quickly, swallowing hard, trying to steady both tray and hands. Harper sat at a corner table, watching silently. There was no intervention, only the calculated distance of authority observing its own system in motion. A lesson being delivered without words. Delgado's smirk grew. "Do you even know how to walk with that tray? Or are we gonna watch it hit the floor before lunch?" He leaned closer, eyes scanning every small tremor in Reynolds's posture. A laugh from one of the nearby soldiers echoed softly, enough to make Reynolds's stomach twist. Public embarrassment didn't need shouting. It lived in the quiet, judgmental space of onlookers. Reynolds's grip tightened. He imagined the tray toppling, imagined every veteran watching the disaster. Every second stretched. He wanted to disappear, wanted the room to swallow him whole, but there was no escape. Not here. Not in front of this audience. "You're trembling," Delgado said, almost a whisper, but the volume of authority made it sound louder than the mess hall itself. "Control yourself. Or maybe you're just not cut out for this." His gaze swept across the others, letting the implication hang in the air. Watch, judge, anticipate failure. Nurse Ellis passed behind Reynolds, her eyes sharp. She didn't speak, but the subtle shift in her posture, leaning just slightly closer, hands brushing lightly against the cart of supplies she carried, gave him a tether. A reminder that not everyone would exploit his mistakes, that competence wasn't always tied to rank. Reynolds finally reached the table without dropping a single item. Delgado's eyes narrowed, inspecting every movement, every falter of the hand, every swallowed breath. Good. For now. The words sounded like praise, but the weight behind them was conditional, a knife edge over a precipice. Lunch continued, but the tension lingered. Soldiers glanced at Reynolds occasionally, some with sympathy, most with neutral curiosity. He felt the pressure of the hierarchy more acutely than ever, the invisible chains of scrutiny that gripped every rookie in these halls. Later, outside on the training field, the escalation continued. Harper called the group to attention, their boots crunching over gravel. A drill, supposedly routine, became a test of endurance and obedience. "You will hold the line," Harper barked. "No excuses." Reynolds fell slightly behind, panting, muscles screaming. Delgado was beside him now, a shadow of authority. "What's the matter, Private? Thought you could handle orders without proving yourself." His voice was calm, deliberate, but every syllable pressed down, heavier than Harper's commands. Reynolds straightened as best he could. He gritted his teeth, forcing rhythm with his breathing. Around him, the other soldiers moved in near-perfect synchronicity. Any error was magnified, noted, internalized. His failure wasn't just personal, it was a spectacle, a lesson in hierarchy and control. A whistle cut the field air, sharp and unyielding. "Drop and give me 20. Delgado ordered, voice casual but piercing. Reynolds's arms shook as he lowered himself to the ground, every push-up a public display of compliance under pressure. Soldiers watched, silently reinforcing the lesson. Harper's eyes scanned the group, noting the subtle tremor of exhaustion in Reynolds's arms and shoulders. Ellis passed again, walking between lines, adjusting posture, correcting form without a word. Her presence contrasted Delgado's methods, measured, effective, quietly authoritative. It reminded Reynolds that authority wasn't always about domination. Sometimes it was about control tempered with awareness. By the end of the drill, Reynolds's uniform was soaked with sweat, his hands raw, but he remained upright. Delgado stepped back, eyes scanning the assembled group, voice low but cutting. "Remember this. Every time you falter, someone is watching. And someone is waiting." The field emptied slowly. Soldiers dispersed, murmuring to each other. Reynolds's chest heaved, but his eyes lingered on Delgado and Ellis, two sides of the same coin, one wielding authority like a weapon, the other like a tool. Both taught lessons, but only one left bruises visible to the world. Reynolds realized, then, that survival here wasn't just about physical skill. It was about endurance under judgment, composure under scrutiny, and the ability to navigate authority that could both crush and protect. The lesson was clear. Misjudged or underestimated, every move mattered, and the eyes of the military world were always watching. Reynolds had learned to anticipate the rhythm of the med bay, but today it felt different. The steady hum of the fluorescent lights seemed sharper, the metallic scent of antiseptic more pungent. Even the distant generator outside carried a low, insistent pulse, almost like a heartbeat counting down. He moved along the rows of cots, checking vitals as instructed. Each monitor beeped predictably, yet somewhere beneath the routine, a subtle discord hummed, a pause here, a flicker of light there, that prickled at his nerves. Ellis passed him, eyes scanning charts, hands steady. "You're early with the readings," she said quietly. Her tone was neutral, but the faint lift of an eyebrow suggested she had noticed something he hadn't. Reynolds nodded, unsure what she meant, and moved on, trying to ignore the prickling feeling at the back of his neck. In the corner, Delgado was fiddling with a piece of equipment, muttering under his breath. Reynolds caught fragments, missed it again. "Can't trust." The words were incomplete, and Delgado's face, partially shadowed, revealed nothing. Still, the partial syllables landed like stones, sparking unease. Harper entered silently, clipboard in hand, expression unreadable. Reynolds thought he noticed Harper glance toward Ellis and Delgado in a way that was almost cautious. But it could have been his imagination. The room returned to routine immediately, monitors beeping, the shuffling of feet, the faint clink of metal trays. Nothing overt. But Reynolds felt the tension coil tighter around him, like the air itself had grown heavier. During rounds, Reynolds noticed small, subtle discrepancies. A patient's chart slightly altered, a nurse holding back a word, only to exhale quietly when no one was watching. The veterans moved with purpose, but occasionally their eyes would flicker to a corner, to the monitors, to each other, in ways that didn't match the urgency of their actions. There was caution in their gestures, restraint in their words. Someone was making them pause, even just for a fraction of a second. At lunch, the mess hall buzzed with noise, but Reynolds felt isolated. Conversations around him faltered when certain officers walked by. A chuckle would cut off mid-laugh. A glance toward him seemed to carry more weight than normal. He caught Delgado staring at him from across the room, expression unreadable. Reynolds looked away quickly. When he glanced back a moment later, Delgado was pretending to adjust his uniform, but his eyes lingered just long enough to unsettle. Harper spoke during the meal, a short, clipped announcement. "Check your supplies. We'll run a drill this afternoon." Nothing unusual, yet the phrasing felt deliberate, almost coded. Ellis nodded, small motion, unremarkable to anyone else. Reynolds noticed the way her fingers tapped the edge of the tray, slow, controlled, as if holding back a warning. Later, on the training field, Reynolds and the others ran through drills. The sun glinted harshly off helmets and rifles, the air thick with exertion. Every motion was measured, every order repeated. Yet beneath the surface, subtle anomalies persisted. Commands came with slight hesitation, or without expected finality. A glance between Ellis and Harper lasted a beat too long. Delgado's barked instructions occasionally lagged behind the rhythm of the exercise, almost as if he were testing more than training. Reynolds caught himself noticing things he shouldn't. The way Harper's jaw clenched when someone faltered, the almost imperceptible tension in Delgado's shoulders, the slight tightening of Ellis's lips before she offered a correction. None of it matched what had happened in the cold open or during escalation. The veterans seemed guarded, waiting, watching. In the medbay afterward, Reynolds checked the monitors again. One patient's heart rate line flickered oddly, momentary flat lines that corrected themselves immediately. He frowned, tapping the screen. Ellis hovered behind him. "You saw that, didn't you?" she asked softly, though her voice was almost a whisper. "Don't say anything yet. Just observe." Reynolds blinked. Observe. His pulse quickened. He hadn't been told to watch for irregularities before, just to report vitals. But the subtle caution in her tone, the tiny crease in her brow, suggested he was supposed to notice something. Something important. Outside, the wind whipped through the open windows, carrying dust and the faint metallic tang of the bass. Shadows stretched across the floor, lengthening unnaturally. Reynolds rubbed his eyes, convincing himself the unease was fatigue. Yet each glance at Delgado or Harper or even Ellis was accompanied by that same subtle shift, a pause, a flicker of tension that didn't belong to ordinary routine. By evening, the medbay was quieter. Monitors beeped in rhythm, footsteps echoed against the walls. Reynolds's hands shook slightly as he adjusted 4 lines. He noticed small things he'd never paid attention to, a scrub top slightly off-kilter, the angle of a clipboard, a patient's wrist strap not fully aligned. Each detail seemed insignificant on its own, but together they created a mosaic of unease, a sense that the order of things was off. Ellis passed him again, glancing down at the monitors. She didn't speak, didn't gesture. She just exhaled slowly, the faintest shake of her head. Reynolds realized her tension mirrored his own. And yet, while he felt exposed and vulnerable, she moved with deliberate calm, as though she knew what was coming, but couldn't tell him. The room felt smaller, heavier. Every beep, every footstep, every glance carried weight. Reynolds could feel the invisible pressure of scrutiny, layered over the physical exhaustion of the day. Nothing had happened overtly, no confrontation, no threat, but the subtle hints accumulated, threading tension through every corner of the med bay. As he straightened a monitor, he caught Delgado watching him again. The sergeant's expression was unreadable, but his eyes, sharp, calculating, held a message. Reynolds didn't know what it was yet. But he understood this much. Nothing here was coincidental. Nothing was simple. And the unease, quiet and pervasive, promised that when the truth revealed itself, it would hit hard, and the consequences would be inescapable. Reynolds thought he had learned the rhythm of the med bay, but today, it seemed to twist beneath him. As he adjusted in 4-line, the monitor flickered again. A subtle flat line, only for a heartbeat, then normal. His eyes darted up instinctively. No one else reacted, not even Delgado, who stood nearby, arms crossed, observing like a hawk. A nurse's cart toppled in the corner, a clatter of metal and glass, but Ellis was already there before it fully hit the floor, steadying it with a single hand while guiding a panicked medic away with the other. Reynolds blinked. That was fast, impossibly fast. But when he tried to meet her eyes, she merely gave a small, composed nod, as if nothing had happened. Later, Harper called the group for another check. "Private Reynolds, you're with Ellis on this one. Follow her lead." Reynolds fell into step beside her. Every instruction was precise, delivered quietly, almost casually. Yet the way she moved, the way she anticipated every complication before it arose, was unnerving. Reynolds nearly stumbled over a dropped glove, but Ellis's hand shot out, not to guide him fully, just enough to prevent the fall, subtle and controlled. She didn't make a show of it. No one noticed. But Reynolds felt it, the hidden skill, the unseen edge. During rounds, a patient's monitor beeped irregularly. Delgado barked an order, expecting Reynolds to follow protocol. But Ellis stepped forward, her voice calm but commanding, stopping Delgado mid-command. She adjusted settings, checked vitals, and administered the necessary treatment, all in one fluid motion. Reynolds caught the flicker in Delgado's eyes, surprise. Brief, nearly imperceptible, gone before it could register fully. Reynolds wanted to ask what just happened, but something in Ellis's posture, tight shoulders, unwavering gaze, told him not to. Not yet. Outside, on the training field, a sudden drill went awry. Soldiers misstepped, rifles clattered. Delgado barked orders, voice rising. Reynolds froze momentarily, unsure which way to move. Ellis appeared at his side, guiding his stance, correcting his posture, moving almost faster than he could perceive. The near miss of a rifle swinging too close, the snap of boots against gravel, they passed without incident. Reynolds's heart raced, mind spinning. How had she moved so fast? So decisively. And yet, she hadn't shouted, hadn't made a scene. Every veteran in the vicinity continued their tasks, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge what had just passed. Only Reynolds, standing slightly behind, realized the subtle mastery in her actions. Even Delgado's smirk felt different now. Slightly wary. Calculated. It was as if the sergeant knew something was shifting but couldn't or wouldn't voice it. Harper's clipboard clicked against the metal railing as he stepped back, observing. The calm authority of Ellis contrasted sharply with the usual command hierarchy, unsettling the order Reynolds had come to expect. The quiet dominance in her movements, the near-perfect timing, the way she could step in to avert mistakes without drawing attention, it suggested a capability far beyond what he had assumed. The day drew toward evening. The med bay emptied slowly, shadows lengthening across cots and monitors. Reynolds lingered at the edge, watching Ellis review charts, her hands moving almost unconsciously over the lines of data, anticipating issues before they arose. She paused briefly, glanced toward him, and the faintest smile touched her lips. Not a reassurance, not a reveal, just a subtle acknowledgement. Reynolds realized then that the unease he had felt all day wasn't just his imagination. There was something different about Ellis, something precise, controlled, and far more competent than anyone, including Delgado, seemed willing to admit. But the full truth remained just out of reach. The audience, like Reynolds, only glimpsed the edges of her skill, near misses, subtle interventions, tiny flickers of awareness that hinted she was not ordinary. Nothing definitive had happened yet, and the consequences, when they came, promised to be far more significant than a simple correction or reprimand. And in that quiet, tense space, Reynolds understood. The rules of authority here might be shifting, and the person he had underestimated, the one he had assumed was just another rookie, might not be what she seemed at all. The alarm blared through the med bay, urgent and insistent. A patient's monitor screamed irregular flat lines, echoing off metal walls. Chaos rippled instantly, soldiers scrambling, medics shouting, orders overlapping. Reynolds froze for a heartbeat, unsure which command to follow. Then Ellis moved. Not quickly, not in haste, but with a precision that cut through the panic. She stepped forward, voice calm, sharp and unyielding. Clear the area. Now. Every head turned. Delgado froze mid-step, his jaw tight. Harper's clipboard dropped almost imperceptibly, eyes narrowing. The room stilled not in confusion, but in sudden recognition. Something had shifted. Ellis's hands worked over the equipment, flipping switches, adjusting IVs, redirecting oxygen. Each movement deliberate, perfect. Commands flew from her lips, short, exacting, and the soldiers obeyed instantly. Reynolds's stomach dropped. Every action she took was authority incarnate, no hesitation, no question, no doubt. Delgado stepped toward her, instinctively, mouth opening to assert control. Ellis didn't flinch. She didn't even glance at him. One word, firm and clipped, stopped him mid-sentence. Stand down. It was not a request. It was a law. The room responded as if an invisible switch had been flipped. Soldiers straightened. Medics stepped aside. Even Harper's posture shifted, a silent acknowledgement of command that transcended rank. Ellis moved past Reynolds, adjusting a monitor and correcting a medication line in one fluid motion. The flat line on the screen normalized, and the tension that had gripped the med bay evaporated almost instantly. Reynolds felt it in his chest, the weight of authority finally landing, undeniable. The person he had assumed was just another nurse, just another cog in the machine, was not ordinary. She was extraordinary. Her hidden rank, her competence, her command, it had always been there, simmering beneath the surface, and now it was visible to all. Delgado backed away, hands unclenched. His smirk was gone, replaced by something unfamiliar, respect. Harper's eyes lingered on her, a faint nod barely perceptible, but unmistakable. Every action, every glance, every instinctive move of the veterans had shifted in an instant. Ellis straightened, shoulders squared, voice dropping to normal as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. She glanced at Reynolds briefly, eyes steady, and for the first time, he felt both the magnitude of her capability and the fragility of his own assumptions. The alarm quieted. The room exhaled collectively, though silence still hummed with the awareness of what had just transpired. The power dynamic had reversed, and no one in the med bay would forget it. Not ever. The med bay had settled into a tense quiet, though it was a different quiet than before. The alarms had faded, the monitors beeped steadily, but the weight of the earlier chaos lingered like a shadow. Reynolds stood frozen for a moment, watching Ellis move through the room with the same deliberate calm she had shown during the crisis. The ease with which she had taken control now hung in the air, an invisible benchmark against which everyone else's competence, or lack thereof, was suddenly measured. Delgado leaned against the wall, arms crossed, but the casual smirk was gone. He had retreated, not in defeat, but in recognition. His eyes followed Ellis, tracing her movements with an unusual intensity. The sergeant's habitual bravado had been tempered. He knew the game had changed. This wasn't humiliation, exactly. It was the quiet acknowledgement of someone who had authority beyond what rank, age, or experience alone might suggest. Harper moved between the cots, clipboard clutched tightly, methodical and careful in his observations. He made notes, yes, but there was a subtle shift in how he walked, how he measured the space between himself and Ellis. Authority could be fluid, he realized, and in that fluidity, the unspoken hierarchy had shifted. He didn't speak openly about it, but everyone felt the undercurrent of respect and caution threading through his posture and movements. Reynolds felt small in the aftermath, though not weak. He had been caught in the middle of competence and authority he had underestimated, and the realization weighed on him. His mind replayed the near misses, the 4-line about to tip, the patient monitor, the drill outside. Each one was a subtle warning he hadn't fully grasped until Ellis had acted. He understood now that survival in this environment wasn't just about following orders. It was about awareness, initiative, and the ability to trust or misjudge the people around him. The other medics and nurses moved cautiously. Conversations were quieter, more deliberate. Nobody laughed or whispered as before. The room operated like a living organism that had just been jolted by a shockwave. It continued to function, but with a heightened awareness of vulnerability and power. Even routine tasks, checking vitals, adjusting trays, recording observations, carried new weight. Every hand, every glance, every motion had to be measured. Ellis finally paused beside Reynolds, examining a patient's chart. She didn't lecture or boast. She didn't need to. Her quiet authority was enough to shape the actions of those around her. She looked at Reynolds briefly, just long enough for him to feel the gravity of her presence, then moved on without a word. That brief acknowledgement alone left him reconsidering everything he thought he knew about hierarchy, skill, and judgment. The day wore on. Routines resumed, but subtly altered. Delgado gave orders more sparingly, his voice measured, his tone slightly tempered. Harper walked with a slight pause before intervening, as if waiting to gauge the right moment and the right approach. Even the rookies, Reynolds included, felt the invisible boundary lines redrawn. The authority dynamic had shifted, and while nothing had been announced or formalized, everyone operated differently. By the evening, the med bay was quieter. Soldiers left in small clusters, conversations muted. Reynolds sat at a corner cot, hands folded, reflecting on the events of the day. He realized that what had just occurred wasn't about winning or losing, nor about humiliation or revenge. It was about competence being recognized where it had been underestimated, and the ripple effects of that recognition across the entire environment. Ellis moved through the room once more, checking equipment and monitoring patients. Her presence was firm but unobtrusive. Reynolds watched her handle a delicate procedure, noting how every motion was intentional, every decision deliberate. He understood that this was authority earned through skill, not demanded through intimidation. The contrast between her approach and Delgado's earlier dominance was stark. One relied on fear and hierarchy, the other on competence and quiet command. Even outside the med bay, the consequences were evident. Soldiers spoke differently, their posture subtly shifted, their focus sharper. Veterans who had once relied on seniority alone now evaluated actions more carefully, acknowledging skill where it appeared. Respect had recalibrated itself, not through confrontation, but through demonstrated capability. Reynolds felt a mix of humility and resolve. He had witnessed firsthand the tangible difference between assumed authority and earned authority. He understood the responsibility that came with power and the quiet but profound effect it had on everyone in the environment. Mistakes could no longer be brushed off, hesitations were costly. But more importantly, the recognition of skill, even when hidden or underestimated, had the power to reshape relationships, hierarchies, and outcomes. As the med bay emptied, Ellis finally stopped at a central workstation, reviewing the last of the patient charts. Reynolds approached cautiously, unsure what to say. She didn't speak immediately, but her eyes met his, calm and unwavering. That simple exchange conveyed more than words ever could: awareness, expectation, and the subtle passing of responsibility. The lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the room. Reynolds realized that the lessons of the day were not dramatic, nor were they forged in punishment or reward. They were embedded in observation, in timing, and in recognition of capability. The ripple effects of Ellis's hidden authority would last longer than the shift itself, changing interactions, attitudes, and the understanding of power. And in that quiet, reflective space, Reynolds understood the most important truth: respect had to be earned, misjudgment had consequences, and the presence of true competence could change everything without a single shout or display of force. The med bay had returned to routine, but nothing and no one operated exactly the same way again. The med bay was quiet now, though the hum of life carried on in subtle ways, the gentle beeping of monitors, the distant clatter of trays, the soft shuffle of boots along linoleum. Reynolds sat at the edge of a cot, hands folded, still processing the events of the past hours. The adrenaline that had gripped him earlier had faded, leaving behind something heavier: awareness. He thought about Ellis. Not just what she had done during the crisis, but how she had done it. There were no dramatic gestures, no raised voice, no posturing. Her authority had been quiet, precise, almost invisible until the moment it mattered most. The weight of it had shifted the room, not by intimidation, but by competence. That realization settled deep in Reynolds's chest. Respect wasn't demanded. It was earned, and sometimes it arrived silently, long before anyone noticed. Reynolds's gaze moved across the med bay. Delgado was at the far corner, cleaning equipment with a meticulousness that suggested reflection. Even the sergeant's usual bravado was tempered, softened by the acknowledgement of someone whose ability exceeded assumptions. Harper walked between cots, observing, noting, but doing so with a restraint he had not shown earlier. Everyone's movements now carried a subtle rhythm, recalibrated after witnessing authority exercised flawlessly, without spectacle. Reynolds realized humility was equally important. He had underestimated Ellis, assuming what he saw on the surface reflected the full measure of competence. He had learned, painfully and clearly, that assumptions could be dangerous. In the military, as in life, underestimation had consequences, not just for the individual, but for everyone around them. Every glance, every hesitation, every misjudged reaction was part of a larger system of cause and effect. He reflected on the near misses of the day, the moments that could have unraveled the shift, the drills that nearly faltered, the monitors that briefly flatlined. It was the small, almost imperceptible interventions that had made all the difference. And those interventions had come from someone whose authority he had doubted, whose skill he had failed to recognize. That was the lesson, stark and unadorned. The true measure of authority is not visibility, but effect. Ellis moved silently through the room, adjusting a monitor here, checking a chart there. She did not speak of rank, nor did she boast. Yet the environment had shifted around her. Soldiers moved with slightly straighter posture, medics approached tasks with sharper focus, and even the veterans, the ones whose authority had seemed absolute, acted with a deference born of recognition. Reynolds understood then that authority was not about assertion, but about the quiet power of competence recognized by those who mattered most. Outside, the wind carried the faint metallic tang of the bass. Sunlight fell across the tarmac in long streaks, casting shadows that seemed to stretch and settle in ways that mirrored the day's events. Reynolds felt the weight of observation, the understanding that every action was now measured against a higher standard. Not through fear, not through punishment, but through example. Authority had been exercised, consequences had been delivered, and the impact lingered in the atmosphere itself. He thought about his own future, about the choices he would make when faced with authority, and when given the chance to exercise it himself. Respect, he realized, was reciprocal. It had to be earned, nurtured, and acknowledged. Misjudgment carried a cost, not just to pride, but to effectiveness, to lives, to the cohesion of the team. The lessons were quiet, subtle, and unrelenting. They would shape him in ways he might not even recognize for years. Reynolds exhaled, letting his shoulders loosen for the first time since the alarm had sounded. He watched Ellis pause by a monitor, hands resting lightly on the edges, gaze sweeping the room. She did not need to speak to command attention. She did not need to justify herself. In that quiet presence, Reynolds saw the full power of authority, not in noise or spectacle, but in competence, judgment, and the ability to act decisively when it mattered most. And in that moment, Reynolds understood something he hadn't before. Leadership was not about who shouted the loudest, who barked the sharpest order, or who carried the most visible rank. Leadership was about quiet vigilance, awareness of others, the humility to act with precision, and the foresight to prevent disaster before it arrived. It was about earning respect by being worthy of it, not demanding it by virtue of position alone. The room hummed quietly, the day winding down, yet Reynolds felt a tension linger, the same tension that had followed him all day. Not a tension of fear, but of awareness. He knew he would carry the lessons forward, the subtle recalibration of authority, the recognition of skill where it was least expected, the understanding that consequences were not punishment, but reflection of reality. He rose from the cot, shoulders squared, posture firmer. The med bay was no longer just a room of routine and hierarchy. It was a place where competence, vigilance, and respect had real, tangible weight. And Reynolds, in his own small way, felt the quiet responsibility of having witnessed it, absorbed it, and learned it. The light from the window shifted again, stretching long shadows across the floor. For the first time, Reynolds noticed the room felt alive in a new way, not chaotic, not fearful, but attuned. Every movement, every glance, every breath carried meaning. He understood, finally, that authority exercised with precision and humility reshaped the space itself. And the memory of today would linger, quietly, powerfully, in every action yet to come.